So this presentation is about brood factories. There. So what is a brood factory? Well, a brood factory is a beehive of whatever style, it doesn't matter, that provides your apiary frames of brood, combs of brood, to be used wherever needed in the apiary. Their whole function in life is to provide me frames of brood in my apiary, either for making nucleus colonies, for building weak hive, boosting weaker hives, or setting up very strong cell builders. But that's what it's all about for me. Harvesting frames of brood like this that are starting to emerge, and that they'll just boost the population of a colony real quick. So can any style beehive be used? Yeah, of course. Of course, it doesn't matter. It would help to have the frames of brood be the same size frames in the rest of your apiary. But other than that, you know, any beehive can be used as a brood factory. The first reference I ever heard with about brood factories was from a book, For the Love of Bees by Leslie Bill. She's a British author, and she wrote a book about traveling with Brother Adam to find the Monticola bee in Africa. And she wrote a little bit about Buckfast Abbey, and she mentioned that Brother Columban, who was Brother Adam's mentor, devised a beehive that would hold 4 nucleus colonies. And in the springtime, he would use the excess brood to boost his honey production colonies. Well, I read that and I said, no kidding, he does that too? Yeah, because I was doing the same kind of a thing at the time, and I never read anything about it. But you know, it's like everything else we do, and we're not the first to. Sometimes we think we invented something, or we have some crazy way of notion or whatever of beekeeping and management and whatever. And lo and behold, here's somebody in 1900 doing the very same thing I'm doing today. Brood factories are, in my brood factories, they're in nucleus colony configuration, which is a vertical configuration. They're, as all my other nukes are, they're in the divided box on the bottom, and then with 4 combs each on each side of the divider. And then above are nuke supers holding 4 combs each, so that you have a divided stack all the way up through. And I really think that that the vertical configuration, especially in something like a brood factory, where you're trying to get the bees to produce you as many frames of brood as quickly as possible, that the vertical configuration is a better plan than the horizontal. What's the horizontal? Well, the horizontal is say a 10-frame box, a 10-frame Langstroth setup, where if you want the bees to expand horizontally, they have to be able to warm those combs out at the edges of the brood nest. How do they do that? By building population. How do they do that? By increasing their brood production. And so you're kind of stuck there for a while. But in a vertical configuration, heat rises. You've only got 4 combs above or wide. They don't have to expand horizontally. They can just fill that chamber with heat and just crank out the frames of brood. So that's one of the benefits, I think, of having these brood factories in the nuke or vertical configuration. Now, this is a good one. This is actually one of the reasons I put this PowerPoint together, because you know, it wasn't long after I started using divided nuke boxes with supers on top that the bee catalogs got hold of it. And my last presentation, I got it wrong. I apologize to Jack and Better Bee, but they were the first to start making the double nuke box configuration with the supers on top. And they actually did call it the double nuke box, and they did give credit to Kirk Webster and myself, which I appreciate. But all the other ones, it started with Brushy Mountain and went to Kelly and went to Man Lake and went to Data and everybody else. And they make a divided nuke box on the bottom with nuke supers on top. And they call it a resource hive. Okay, fine. Yeah, it's a resource hive. I understand that. But they just don't get it right as far as use and management. As far as use goes, they seem to think, and the videos I've watched, the YouTubes I've watched, the discussions I've watched about how great resource hives are. Resource hive is a one-to-one thing. So you have one resource hive. You have a hive, a colony in the apiary that needs to be fixed. They need a new queen. They've gone queenless. You want to change the queen. They need to be boosted in strength or whatever. You use your one resource hive to fix one beehive in the apiary, one-to-one. Well, brood factories are so much more, and I hope you understand by the end of this presentation what brood factories mean to me. But without brood factories, I'd be sunk. I think I'd have to migrate, and there's no way that I'm going to be a migratory. So, and why not use 8 or 10 frame hives? Another reason is because of the weight. You know, you start moving around 8 or 10 frame hives and picking off honey supers to harvest brood. So I get away from the 8 and 10 frame hives where you need horizontal movement, and you get into the nuke configuration where you have vertical configuration, and I just mentioned that. You can have more queens laying, requiring fewer comb resources, which is really what this is about, right? Cranking out frames of brood. I want as many queens laying eggs as I can possibly get with the least amount of resources devoted to such. And then the ease of handling and the weight, you know, well, you'll see some pictures here in a second. So what do we use these for? They can boost weak colonies. They can strengthen cell builders. They can start nucleus colonies. So boosting weak and slow colonies, I've sometimes referred to harvesting brood from brood factories and giving it to the weak colony as dropping a bee bomb on them. And so if you put a box of emerging brood or any brood, emerging brood on the bottom board, and you put that slow colony on top, I don't mean a pitifully weak thing, but something that needs help. And when those frames of brood emerge, that population is going to explode like somebody dropped a bomb on it. And so that's hence the phrase bee bombs. But that works great just by giving the slow colony combs of emerging. Combs like this. They're just full combs that the slow colony can actually take care of. You don't want to put a lot of brood in a hive that's dying, but and so all that brood comes from brood factories. Strengthening cell builders. Well, we harvest brood from brood factories, and the left-hand photograph, the green box up on top is a box of brood. And there's 2 frames of honey and 7 frames of emerging brood up there, above a queen excluder, above a strong colony. And we let that brood emerge, and then we turn that green box into a cell builder, and by shaking the core of the brood nest into the cell builder, and with no queens, and in the morning, and we come back in the afternoon to put a graft in the thing, and this is what it looks like. Why? Where did all those bees come from? Well, first off, why are we doing that? Because we're trying to increase the quality of the queen cells, and to do that, we have to increase the amount of jelly fed to each larva pupa in each queen, and that's how you get quality. And how do you increase the jelly fed to each cell by increasing the number of nurse bees. And how do you increase the number of nurse bees to get cells like this? Then by harvesting combs of brood from the brood factories and having that emerge in the cell builder, building a huge population of nurse bees. And so when they're made queenless and some hours later they're given a graft, my gosh, they jump on it. They've got so much jelly. Oh, it's really good. And where does all that brood come from? From brood factories, of course. Or how about starting nucleus colonies? Well, you can start your nucleus colonies. You can start. Let me talk about this for just a second. So I have some shots, some slides coming up that are going to show you the how we manage the combs in the brood factories, how they change from mixed brood to capped brood to emerging brood. So this is just I just wanted you to see this. And so this would be a nucleus colony, a single nucleus colony just made up. So it's a double nuke box, right, with a divider in the middle. And they're started with a frame of honey and a frame of mixed brood, frame of capped brood, and an empty comb with enough bees to cover the brood and maybe the honey. So that's what they look like. And we have whole apiaries of these things, double stories. And they eventually will be turned into brood factories. But where does the brood come from to make all these nucleus colonies? Yards and yards of nucleus colonies, brood factories. Of course they do. That's why I say how important these brood factories are to my operation, because everything I do, every increase I make, every cell I grow is boosted with brood from my brood factories. So how did I get started with brood from my brood factories? Well, I needed brood for starting cell builders and for creating nucleus colonies. But where to obtain that brood? That's what I needed. That's what I needed to know. So at first I harvested brood from production hives. Okay. Well, here's some nice production hives on a flow. It's on my summer flow. I could, there's enough resources now. There's enough bees now. Each of these colonies can probably spare a comb of honey and two combs of brood to start a nucleus colony and some bees. But for instance, the first one here with the white box number 7, it's got 160 pounds of honey on top. Well, so I'm going to take that honey off, take out what I need out of the white box, because that's where the deeps are, and put all that honey back on. And what about the one behind it? That one's got 5 supers of honey, or 5 supers of honey. So I'm going to take 200 pounds. It isn't going to happen. It happened when I was 35. No, it's not going to happen when I'm in my 70s. No. So that was out. Well, then if you've watched my videos, I moved on to, okay, instead of taking a brood out of the strong ones with a honey crop on, how about if I just sacrifice the non-productive colonies? Get rid of them. Throw the queen away. Use the brood and bees that are in there to make nucleus colonies. And that was okay. But I'm still going down in my numbers. And yes, I'm producing 3 or 4 nucleus colonies per non-productive hive. But still, wouldn't it be better to requeen those? It would be. To maybe boost them with a bee balm would be, but I needed the brood. So I harvested those and I sacrificed those, and I sacrificed weak overwintered nuclei. So you take out the nice nucleus colony on the left, and you're left with this one on the right that isn't quite as strong. And well, I should really take more pictures of weak ones. I should, but I don't. But so then in the old style, I would have taken that nucleus colony out of the left, making sure I took the queen. I would move the feeder over to the sidewall, give them 4 more combs, and allow this colony to expand. And later in the summer, I would sacrifice that. Well, too often weak overwintered nuclei have issues other than just their strength. Big one, chalk brood. So a lot of times it's chalk brood that's holding them back. And now I'm making nucleus colonies with chalk. No. So that had to change. Well, what about strong overwintered nuclei as a brood source? Whoa, I mean, you could certainly take one of those and harvest the brood from them, and that would work pretty darn well. So I started with strong overwintered nucleus colonies, 2 double boxes and 2 stories high, 4 combs over 4 combs. And this is about dandelion time. You can see in the upper right, there's some dandelions. Grass hasn't been cut yet, so it's middle of May. And look at the population already here in Vermont, the middle of May. You know, the dandelion flow just started, you know, a week or 2 ago. The first pollen probably came in a month ago. So they do explode. And so in 2011, you know, I've had this slide before. I've explained this before. In 2011, I had 50 of these overwintered nucleus colonies. I built them up, and the first May 9th to June 19th, I harvested 245 frames of brood, and I stocked 35 cell builders, each with 7 frames of brood. And then when I was done with that, we either had queens, or we had cells or virgins being mated, or cells to go in. We started making nucleus colonies. And what was left of the 50 overwintered nucleus colonies, we made 330 nucleus colonies to overwinter, which is, you know, phenomenal. You're talking 10 to 1 or something like this. Well, honestly, I never did it again. I was never able to match those numbers again. One of the reasons is the 50 nucleus colonies were sacrificed. And I made nucleus colonies from these sacrificed nukes longer into July than I do nowadays. But I sacrificed them, they were gone. Now, I don't sacrifice them. I build them up, I harvest what brood I can, and then I winter them over. So I'm not getting as many, but they're permanent. They're perennial. So my brood factories are perennial. So now I don't have to waste them anymore. I can keep the queens in them for 2, sometimes 3 years, but mostly 2. I change them after 2. But so I don't get as many, but it was a much more conservative and sustainable plan, that I don't have to sacrifice my beautiful nucleus colonies every year and start all over again. So I begin with apiaries of strong nuclei. So these are doubles, 2 stories high, doubles, 4 combs over 4 combs. And this is sort of what they look like. So on either side of the division, you can see that they're a little different. The left-hand one has a couple frames of honey, a couple cap broods, and you can see so they've got 1, 2, 3, 4 frames of brood. The one on the right, I think, has 5 frames of brood. That's about right for a 2-story, you know, end of April, beginning of May here. That's about right. And so now we have to add combs to them. And if you're on a flow and you just put a box of combs on top, and you're on a flow, the bees are going to put nectar up there, but we're trying to grow brood. So rather than, I'm putting on another story, correct? So I need 4 combs of something, 4 empty combs to go in here. So you'll see that I will elevate the 2 combs in the center box. I'll elevate them up into, you know, these right here, for instance. I'll elevate these 2 combs. I'll put 2 empty combs there. I'll put the next box on, I'll put the 2 frames of brood up and move up 2 frames of brood up and put 2 more empty combs up there. So those 2 combs will get nectar, but the combs here will get brood. Why is that? Why are those 2 empty combs in each box, in the center, in each nuke, in the center box? Why would I put them there? Well, because the divider between the nucleus colonies is the center of the brood nest. If you've ever wintered double nukes like this and taken the inner covers off and say when it's cold out, but they're in the top and they're good and strong, you'll notice that each nuke is wintering in a semicircle, but it makes one cluster. It's like what C.C. Miller said, that you could winter 2 nukes in a box and they form one cluster as if the division board was shoved down between them. And when did he say that? In 1890 what? You know, seriously. So this has been going on, but so that's what you're doing. I'm trying to increase the empty comb space in her center, the center of her brood nest. And that's where I want my empty combs to go. So I'm going to eliminate one side so we don't have to, it's not too confusing. So here it is. This one has been built up from a 2-story nuke to a 3-story nuke by adding combs of empty combs. Now, another thing I like to see here in the top box, these 2 brood combs that are now in the top against the divider were what I elevated. Now, look what I've got going here. I've got 2 frames of brood in the bottom. I got a frame of brood in the middle one next to the empties. And above the empties, I've got 2 frames of brood. I've got those 2 empty combs surrounded by brood. It becomes the center of her brood nest. They will not put nectar in the center, in those center combs. They'll put brood in there. And so that's what we do. And so then we have to add more stories. You know, we're constantly pulling brood out of the brood factories, but they're increasing population just the same. So we're not pulling enough. We pull enough out to keep them from swarming, hopefully, but not enough so they dwindle. So they keep increasing their population. They keep making honey in the top boxes. So now they're up to 3. And sometimes you could see in the background, here's one that's already 4 stories high. It's what we have to do in order to keep the brood factories in the hives. So now we're going to start harvesting brood for cell builders. This comes first in the season. We start May 9th usually, and we start harvesting brood from brood factories and building up the first group of cell builders. There's 4 cell builders, so that's 28 frames of brood, and we do let's see, there's 14 rounds of 4 cell builders. It's 56 cell builders a year. So, but anyway, so this is where we left it last time when we increased it from 2 stories to 3 stories by putting in empty comb. So then this is what we're going to do. We're going to start pulling out frames of brood out of the brood factories. You know, you can't take the queen. If you take the queen, the brood factory's done. They're going to have emergency cells. They're not going to make any brood for a long time. And plus, if you're making cell builders and you took the queen and you put her above the queen excluder in a cell builder, 10 days later, you come to graft and there's a queen and young larvae up there. Oh man. So I don't graft into a cell builder that has larvae in it. Only emerging. No larvae, no open brood. I don't want my nurse bees to be sharing duties with all those larvae they have in the cell builder and my graft larvae. So, but anyway, that's Kate and Tucka harvesting brood, harvesting frames of emerging like this one. So this would be a 3-story brood factory. Taking it apart, you see on the left box, We take it apart. This up on top on the left is the very top box. On the right is the center box, and the bottom box is the bottom of the hive. Center of the brood nest. Where is the center of the brood nest? Right here. Right here against the divider in the center box. So if we're going to pull 2 frames of brood, maybe we'll pull 2 frames of brood and a frame of honey. So we'll pull the 2 frames of brood out of the center box here against the divider. We'll pull a frame of honey out from over here like that. We'll put the hive back together again. We'll give it 2 empty combs here and maybe an empty comb or a foundation up here. Put it back together again. Mark that we took out 2 frames of honey and a frame of 2 frames of brood and a frame of honey. Like this. And they really do get populated. So you can see that if you took a comb or 2 of brood out of that and put 2 empty combs in that, right in the center of that brood nest. Look at that. So they'll fill that right up again. So here we are. This is that same picture where we've added the empty combs after expanding up. And again, I keep bringing that photo forward. So after adding combs is on the left. Harvesting emerging combs. So if you look at the center box on the left hive, you'll see that blue comb says mixed brood. Well, if I come back there a number of days later, what's happened? Well, remember the 2 empty combs? Now they have mixed brood in them, right? Brood in all stages, eggs, larvae, sealed. The 2 empty combs up on top that I added up on top, but they're up on top on the outside. And we're on a honey flow. They're now honey or nectar. But look how the combs have changed from, for instance, the mixed broods have become emerging brood, right? Because by the time I got back there, it's now emerging. The capped brood emerged and she relayed in it. And now it's mixed brood. So the mixed brood has become emerging brood. So now we take these 2 combs. We take these 2 combs away and maybe a honey. And so we'll take this emerging brood, put an empty comb. We'll take this honey, put an empty comb or a foundation. We'll take this emerging, we'll put in an empty. And so that's what it becomes. And and so if we want to add foundation is sort of similar. We're now taking a 3-story double nuke, the left-hand hive. And this is how it was after we harvested brood. And the empties that we put in, right, they became mixed brood. And another empty became honey. So this is everyone like this. Does everyone follow this exact pattern? No, of course not. I'm just trying to give you an idea of what we do and what we're up against when we're harvesting brood from brood factories. Well, now we want to put another story on these and get these built up into 4. And again, if you just put a box of foundation up on top, the bees will draw it out and fill it up with nectar. And we're trying to increase the number of combs in the hive, surely, but we're also trying to get foundation drawn out. And they might even put brood in the foundation. How do I get rid of my picture over here like that? There you go. And so we put foundation 2 against the side, the divider, and 2 upstairs on the outside, and is surrounded by the foundation one more time, is surrounded by brood above and below, and it becomes the center of the brood nest, and she will put brood there. And so you can see that we put foundation, but at the same time we had emerging brood. So we took a frame of emerging brood out. We took 2 frames of emerging brood out. and replace it with comb. And then the next time around, we did it again. We came back again in maybe 10 days, 12 days, 2 weeks, whatever our rotation is. You see that empty comb we put in the center of the brood nest is now mixed. The mixed is now emerging. We'll snag that one. Same thing in the bottom. And there's a mixed, it's now emerging. We took that one. And we probably took a frame of honey or whatever. So depending on what we're doing, whether we need honey or not. And so this is just sort of how we move. And so as you see, they're getting built up. They're 4, sometimes even 5 stories high. And we pull brood out of them every 10 days, 2 weeks, enough so they won't swarm, but not so much they dwindle. And then once we have mated queens, so if we start our first cell builders on May 9th, the first queens are caught on May 13th. And on the 14th or the 15th, we start making nukes. So that would be June 14th or 15th, we start making nucleus colonies. And so to make nucleus colonies, if you look all the way over on the right, those 4 stacks, those are new nucleus colonies that we're making up. They're part of a double. That's why I left this empty chamber here. But we're going to keep it as one. This is the central divider, and then you have another one here. And so to make nucleus colonies, we use a frame of honey, a frame of mixed brood, a frame of capped brood, and an empty comb. We don't use all capped brood because mixed brood is better at holding the bees. So we're making these nucleus colonies weak. I mean, they've only got 2.5 frames of bees. We move them to another apiary. They can be some drifting, especially if we snagged a queen and there's a queen in one of them. But the mixed brood will hold the bees in the colony better than just capped. And so each nucleus colony gets a honey, a mixed brood, a capped brood, and an empty comb. And so if we're pulling brood out of these, the top box has 4 combs of honey in it, and we could take that whole top box off, still leaves them a box of honey on top. And we can make 4 nukes. We can put a comb of honey in each of those 4 empty nuke boxes. And then we need mixed brood. So where are we going to get mixed brood? Okay, right here is a mixed brood that's we can pull that out and put an empty comb in it. That goes in. Where's there a sealed brood? Well, we'll get a sealed brood somewhere here, and we'll pull that out. And we don't just pull them all from one. We go down the rows. So if one brood factory can only give us 1 frame of emerging and maybe 1 honey, so okay, we take that. And we go down the road until we have whatever nukes we have to have made for the day, maybe 50. And we usually have around 50 or 50 to 60 to make up after each catch of queens. And that's what we do. And then we move these new nucleus colonies. We cover them and we take them to a nuke yard, a dedicated nuke yard. The whole yard is nucleus colonies, anywhere from 20 to 80 nucleus colonies in one yard. And then we give them a queen right then. No waiting. This deal about waiting, waiting 24 hours, waiting 2 days, waiting 7 days. I've heard waiting 7 days and cut all the emergency cells out. The longer you wait, the more difficult it is to get a queen accepted. Once they start emergency cells, the acceptance rate starts to go down. And so we put them in immediately. We don't wait. We used to wait till the next morning. No, we put them in right now, as soon as they're made and moved and located in their new apiary. And we have very good acceptance. Don't forget, we're catching the queens. We're not shipping them anywhere. The next day or two, they're going in nukes. So we made 352 this year, and only 4 queens got rejected, which is, partly because we're doing this right, making queens and putting them in nukes, and making queens and putting them in nukes. And so we don't really have too much issues we don't really have a lot of queen issues. Anyway. And so this is these are apiaries that were made. This is an apiary that was totally made from brood factory nukes, and given queens, built up into 2 stories and wintered. This is how I keep track of my records on top of the brood factories, with duct tape. And so if you start at the bottom, and we can read this, the annual report of these 2 brood factories. On March 22nd of 2001, they were both okay, which means they had enough feed, and they were queen right, and they weren't weak. They were okay. That's all we're looking for on March 22nd. We could have maybe we put some pollen sub on them. Probably did. Didn't have to feed them. On May 22nd, I think that's what that says. The left-hand nuke had 8 frames of bees, and the right-hand nuke had 4 frames of bees. So there's definitely a difference here. On the 13th of May. So that would be what, 1, 2, 3 weeks later? 3 weeks later, the 8 frames in the left-hand nuke became 8 frames of brood. So we took one away and gave him an empty comb. And we noticed that there was a green dot queen, which means, what was she from? The year before. So, and the one on the right had 5 frames of brood, and we didn't take anything from that. And whoever was doing this thought that this queen should be changed. Okay. Well, we don't have queens yet. We don't have queens until the middle of June. Okay, so we just write it down, make sure everything's okay. They're not sick. On the 18th, we added a 5th box. A 5th box to the left hand. So that means they got 4 boxes now. 5 boxes now. They already had 4. So now they got 5 boxes. That means they have 20 combs. And the one on the right still, they had 5 frames of brood, and that was only 5 days. Okay, from the 13th to the 18th, that's only 5 days. And so that 5 frames of brood hadn't emerged yet. And so they still think that thing needs to be requeened. It's probably the pattern, I would think. On the 14th of June, we're either making nukes now, or we're setting up cell builders now. Let's see, probably cell builders. So we took 2 frames of brood from the left hand, and now the right hand one has started to build up, right? It's got, it had 5 frames of brood. Well, we just took 4 frames of brood. You see what happens. We should have taken some brood out back here on the 13th. But we didn't, and now they're getting too strong. So we had to, it didn't say they had queen cells, but I'll bet you they were getting ready. And so that's what we take from 1 to 3 or more frames of brood, depending on what's going on in the nuke. And then on the 23rd, we took away, from the left, we took 3 frames of brood and a frame of honey. And from the right, we took 3 frames of brood and a frame of honey. And again, they also have a green dot queen. And you can track this through. On the 5th of July, we took 1.5 nukes. Now, at the 5th of July, we're no longer using 2 frames of brood, a mixed and a sealed. We're using 3 frames of brood, because the later we go on in the season, the flow ends in the middle of July for us. And if I make my nucleus colonies the standard way as I do in June, by the time they get their population built up enough so they can draw the foundation I give them, it's too late. So we give them 3 frames of brood just to build that population, to try to imitate what we're seeing in the nucleus colonies that we made in the middle of June. They would have already had 3 frames of brood at least. So we make them with 3 frames, and it really helps a lot. Then on July 20th, so we're done making nucleus colonies. Queens are all done. We're all done with queens. We're all done making nukes. Now it's time for requeening, and we go through all the nucleus colonies, the brood factories, not the nukes, because the nukes all have new queens. We go through the brood factories. Anything that's got a queen that's older than 2 years, we get rid of, we replace. Anything that wasn't productive enough during the season, we replace. And anything that's got a bad pattern or anything like that, we replace it at that time. Because between the end of making nucleus colonies and the beginning of harvest in August, and we have to get it done as early as we can in August, because the varroa mites are building up again. And so that's why we do our requeening then. And yep, we decided that yes, we were going to requeen this this one that said twice to requeen it. And and so we requeened it. We replaced the queen with a new queen, a daughter of breeder 84, and she was mated in 2021. So that's what 8421 means. Then on the 17th of September, we estimated how much weight they had. And because of the drought this year, the nucleus colonies had no fall flow. They were very light. So the one on the left needed 3 gallons plus, and the one on the right needed 3 gallons. So that's very unusual that these brood factories need 3 gallons of food. So then this is how we do requeening. We use push-in cages for requeening. The old queen is removed. A comb of brood is selected that has emerging brood and a little nectar. All the bees are brushed off, and the new queen is located under the cage above emerging brood and nectar, but with no bees. And she's put back in, her comb is put back in for 4 days. On the 4th day, we pull the comb out. We look in there to see what's going on. We observe the actions of the bees. We look at the comb outside the cage. All the emerging bees in here, they emerge. They've never had a queen. They don't know any other queen but that one with the red dot. And they just immediately love her. And they kiss her and they groom her, and she starts to lay. And now she's a laying queen again. The queen that I have, that I catch, that I put on my dining room table overnight, she's no longer a laying queen. She's a mated queen, sure, but she's no longer a laying queen. How much their abdomen shrinks between when I catch that queen and the next morning when I look at her, it's incredible. But she's no longer a laying queen. She's not perceived by the bees to be a laying queen. But because she's under this cage and she's being groomed and fed by these nurse bees, by these young bees, she starts to lay. And now you've brought her into lay. And so now you're able to remove a laying queen from a colony, introduce her under a cage, get her laying again. And now she's a laying queen. Now I said 4 days. Why 4 days? Well, how the egg laid by a queen hatches on the 3rd day, right? And so after 4 days, there should not be any eggs outside the cage. Well, if there are eggs outside the cage, what's up? There's a second queen in that hive. Now you got to go find that second queen, and then you can release the queen. But it just gives you a second chance on those colonies and there's a bunch of them out there that have already replaced their queen, and you're trying to do it again, and you didn't know there was 2 queens. But anyway, so I just, 30 seconds ago, I pulled the cage off. Look at them already. Look at the bees forming a retinue already. So that's how we requeen. So after we're done making our nucleus colonies, the The nukes look about like this. The brood factories look something like this. They have a box of honey on top, and we've added some foundation because we're before the goldenrod flow, and it's pretty good intense flow some years, and they need more room or they're going to swarm on it. And so we give them foundation because, you know, by this time of the year I've run out of comb. I don't have a whole lot of empty combs, so we're trying to increase them. So we give them foundation again against the divider, and it's some empty comb where you see it. And on the last pull of brood, for making nucleus colonies, we try to take them right down to 3 or 4 frames of brood and say the bottom and the second box up. And then everything else above that will probably be honey after the autumn flow of goldenrod and aster. We don't need to leave them, you know, exploding with bees this time of year because they will build back up for winter. And so we want to get as many nucleus colonies as we can out of the brood factory operation and get them back down to a manageable size so that they can build back up and be just right going into winter. So then we take the honey off once the goldenrod flow is done. If there's any honey on them, we take it off. If there's some that need more, then we give it back to them. So the nuke on the right, we're going to take a box of honey off. And we'll put it in storage or use it in the apiary, but we'll put it in storage for later in case we need it. Because I always find some that could be fed or could get honey or both. Okay, so now we've done our requeening. We've harvested the box of honey off the top if they could give it to us. And now we have to do varroa mites. You know, well, there's something pretty special about these brood factories, about most nucleus colonies, but about these brood factories. We don't really have it's really not necessary to get a very early, say early August treatment into these brood factories. Otherwise, they're going to be in trouble. We can wait. We can wait quite a while. One of the reasons we can do that is because we're constantly pulling frames of brood out, sealed brood, out of the brood factories. And when you take frames of sealed brood out, what are you taking? What else are you taking? You're taking varroa mites. And well, where do those varroa mites go? Well, unfortunately, many of them go in the cell builders. And so I'm building the population of mites up in the cell builders. So those colonies, once we've finished cell building for the year and we get the honey off, but you got to get a treatment in there because you've been boosting the mite population all summer. But these brood factories, they can wait. You know, it's not quite so urgent as it is with production colonies. And so this year we used oxalic drizzle. I like the word drizzle better than dribble. I'm sorry. Dribble makes me feel like an old man, you know. But drizzle, yeah. I mean, if it works as well, this is the first year I ever did it. And if it works as well as they're saying it does, I think, you know, I think that'll be our fall treatment from now on. So then we have to feed them for winter. Feeding them for winter is so much easier than production hives. You know, production hives, we got to weigh the production hives. Well, gosh, they weigh anywhere from 130 to 200 pounds. We got to weigh them. You can pick up the top box on the 10 frame production hives and, you know, they weigh 90 pounds or something crazy. And, you know, you're trying to pick them up and examine down below or maybe treat down below, or, you know, it's a lot of lifting. It's a lot of weight. Well, these brood factories, the biggest box they'll ever have on is 4 deep combs. And so say you have a 3-story brood factory, then you can pick up the top box and heft it and figure out, that feels pretty heavy. You could look at it from underneath and say, oh yes, all 4 combs are capped. Good, put that one to the side. Pick up the next one down. Okay, you pick up that one. That one's not full. How much will it take to fill that box? How much will it take, syrup will it take to fill all the combs in that box? Okay, so you estimate it, well, 2 gallons. Okay, so now you got a box up on top that's full of capped honey, and you got a middle box that's going to be full because you're going to feed it 2 more gallons plus whatever they have already, and it's very light and it's very quick. And anyway, that's what we do. So we've estimated how much syrup they need. We usually write it on that tape. I see one of them has a 2, and I'm not sure. But anyway, we estimate what it takes to feed each nucleus colony. And we write it on the tape on the cover. You know, that one was 3+, and the other one was a 3. And we have a feed hole in the inner cover of the nukes. And we can locate 2 gallons of syrup right above the feed hole. They meet right above the hole. They're on shims, so the bees can go up. There's a bee space under the cans. Cans have, you know, 4 or 5 nail holes, 6-penny nail holes near the center somewhere. And they'll go up and suck all that syrup down there, and it's not even a week and that syrup is gone. And if they needed 2, I'm done. If they needed 1 or 2, we're done. If they needed 3, okay, we replace one of the cans with a full can. Another week, done. So feeding takes 2 weeks, done. We do that in September, after the flow, after the goldenrod flow. So as soon as you can no longer smell goldenrod nectar being ripened, that's when we feed here. Right away. We want to get it done early. We want that syrup that's being fed to the bees to be ripened. If they take enough down, they'll even, and their population is good, they'll even cap it when they put it in the combs. Down below on the bottom boards of a production hive, it'll be covered with little wax flakes caused by the syrup feeding. And so these guys each got 2 gallons, and then we put an empty box around it. Some of the old boxes are pretty beat up, so rather than start robbing, put a little duct tape on the crack. Just keep it tight. Don't spill it. If you spill it, it goes in the inner cover fine. If you spill it on the ground, well, you know, you're going to start robbing. And then we do wrap. We're way up here in the north. This is a brood factory yard that's going to get wrapped. We tied the covers down so they wouldn't blow off because, man, we've had some wind this year. This is our first snowstorm. And you can see that there's an upper entrance. See, for instance, the second nuke box from the left, you can see that entrance right there. That's a 3/4 inch auger hole. Every nucleus colony has a 3/4 inch auger hole on that. This is their front. So the main entrance is way down here under the snow. But the top entrance is right here. So they can, you know, it's the same side for them. In the springtime, when we close that with a piece of duct tape, they just march down and they go in this one. And they're so silly, those bees. They come in and their entrance isn't open anymore. And they don't fly back from the field and go, oh yeah, don't forget, we have to go to the bottom entrance. No, they don't do that. They don't have the brains for that. They don't have the memory for that. What is their memory? You know, I think bees have a memory like a website address. Okay, so, you know, you could have newyorkwellness.com. Okay, or you could have newyorkwellness/videos.com, or you could have newyorkwellness/videos/something else.com, right? Okay, well, the bees have that. Their original address is, you know, fly back to the left of that tree and go in that hole up in the top of the box. Okay, and they all do that. Well, what happens when you close that and they have to go down below? They still fly past the tree, go to the hole in the top of the box. Oh yeah, and crawl down below. / you know, / crawl down to the entrance. And so you can see why we have to have an upper entrance here, because they wouldn't get a cleansing flight when the bottom entrances are all frozen with ice and covered with snow, and you get a nice cleansing flight possibility like today, and they can take it. So this is an apiary this is actually a brood factory apiary. This is my main brood factory apiary, and it's in my cell building yard. So everything from this 2-story hive to the left is about 35 cell builders and a number of breeder hives, breeder queens. And then over here are all the brood factories in this location. And when we harvest brood to make cell builders, gosh, we harvest it, put it in a box, carry it over here, put it on top of an excluder, go back and get some more. It's great. We don't have to drive anywhere. And this is, wrapping up the hives, putting the tar paper wrap around them. The tar paper wrap is not insulation. There's no insulating value in tar paper. It's the black color. It's the solar gain that these things get on a cold winter day. And cold winter days are usually sunny. And it warms that paper up. It's incredible how warm that paper gets. And it has to transfer the heat into the hive, into the cluster to some degree. The inner covers, they get a piece of styrofoam on top to prevent condensation underneath the inner cover. Other than that, there's no insulation. And we always tie the covers down because, covers have a way of blowing off, even with stones on them. And hives have a way of tipping over, like the one I had to pick up this morning after this huge windstorm we had this weekend. And they were wrapped and they were tied together. I just had to tip it back up again. No problem. I've had beehives tip over in the wintertime. Bottom board fall right off. They're exposed at the bottom end of the hive. They spent the whole winter covered with snow. The only place they can fly out is the bottom of the hive, and they survive because the cover didn't fall off. So it's very important for us that the covers don't fall off. And this is, I don't know, minutes after I put that wrapper on there, they're already looking out. They're already feeling the heat. So it really does help. So let me just sort of condense this whole thing into one slide. What are we actually doing with these bees? Well, you think about it. In the springtime, we build them up. We add more boxes. We add more combs. We build them up. We build them up. Then we start harvesting brood for cell building. We add more combs. Then we start harvesting brood for nucleus colonies. And we start taking them down. And, they might be 5 stories high. By the time we're done for winter, they're 3 stories high. So that's 8 combs that got to go somewhere. So we build them up and we build them up, and then we take them down and we take them down and we take them down, and we get them all the way down to 3 boxes with 3 or 4 combs of brood and whatever honey they can put away, and we let them go. And they build back up again. And in the springtime, we start it all over again. So we never get rid of them. They're perennial, which is one of the greatest things about these. Plus, they give me so many resources. Think of it. Think of what I've just been talking about. All those nucleus colonies. Okay, so this year, what did we do? We made 1,200 queens. We set up 56 brood cell builders. Okay. Of that, we caged 1,200 queens. We made 350 nukes. We requeened, I don't know, a couple hundred hives probably. And all of the resources for doing all that work came from brood factories. It didn't come from production hives. If you pull all this out of production hives, you no longer have production hives. I would much rather have this other part of my operation where I can use them to give me the resources I need and leave my honey production colonies to produce honey. So I mean, and the nucleus colonies, in the last 5 or 6 years, we had two major losses from varroa mites. I'm talking about over 40 and over 50%. If I didn't have my nucleus colonies to replace all those dead beehives, those dead colonies, and all of that, I didn't buy anything. I didn't buy any queens. I didn't buy any bees. Why? Because I have all these 100 and something brood factories that are cranking me out brood to save my apiary. And again, we go on one more time, even after a big loss, to make a nice honey crop because we've got all the nucleus colonies. So all this from a single resource hive? Of course not. Just think about it, They're not single use units, they're multiple use units. Anyway, all of that comes from brood factories. Anyway, thanks for listening. So looking forward to this is Sean Carroll. Yes. Looking forward to colony increase and was wondering how you deal with mites. I'm interested in increase, but afraid of mites on nukes since we all know they are here, even if we do not see them in testing. Well, yeah, of course there's mites. And of course you have to deal with mites. First off, making nucleus colonies. So you want the brood source for making your nucleus colonies to have as low a mite population as possible. If you start with a low mite population when you're making nucleus colonies, they just seem to outbreed nucleus colonies, varroa mites. This all started with tracheal mites, and you'd have such big losses back in 1990 and 91, and just these beautiful colonies would just be dead in the springtime, and yet the nucleus colonies would be beautiful and alive and strong. And well, what's up with that? Well, I think that the bees outpaced the tracheal mites. The tracheal mites aren't under brood cappings, so the bees that are emerging aren't pre-infested, and so they have to get infested from somewhere in the colony. Well, so these nucleus colonies are cranking out so much clean bees that the tracheal mites never had a chance to catch up. Well, I think the same thing happens in the varroa mites. With varroa mites, that I think the nucleus colonies are outpacing the varroa mites until later in the season. And so I don't think you should be so afraid of it's not, you say that, that even if you don't see them in testing, well, yeah, you will see them in testing. So, don't be afraid of. Buying queens, I guess you're talking about me. I have very limited numbers of queens, because I service the people that I've sold to for years. And so after they place their orders, then I have a few extras and I have a waiting list as long as my legs. So it's difficult. Where do you find the Better Bee double nuke box seems to have extra space that my bees tend to fill up with burr comb. How do you avoid that? I assume you're talking about at the at the nuke box wall, because my space is a bit large for 4 combs, but I can't fit 5. So I space the combs out a little bit more. I have a wider space at the outside wall. Bees will build out that outside surface of the outside comb against the outside wall and never put brood there. So if you let them build it out a little fatter and you keep your other combs at the proper spacing, you don't really see, I don't see so much burr comb. How many days per round for cell builders? Okay. What's that mean? Okay, so is this New Zealand Frank Lindsay by any chance? Yes, no? So let's see, I just lost my how many days per cell building round? Okay, so the cell builder is started on day 1 and it's given 7 frames of emerging and 2 combs of honey. 10 days later, it's grafted into. And 10 days later, the cells are harvested. So it's actually a 20-day, cycle. The day we harvest the cells, we can reestablish that cell builder as a new cell builder again by giving it another 7 frames of brood. You can imagine the population that we get in those cell builders. But so that's what it is. It's 10 days and 10 days. What do you add pollen sub during this buildup, or do you take pollen frames in addition to honey frames for producing nukes? I don't. Let's see. During the spring buildup, and from sometime in March when it's warm enough until the bees start gathering natural pollen, we do feed them pollen sub. As soon as they bring in natural pollen in this area, we don't. They won't take sub anymore. The rest of the year, I do not feed pollen sub. I don't feed pollen sub in the summer. I don't feed pollen sub in the fall. We have a huge pollen flow in the fall, so we don't need that any pollen sub in the fall. For making queen cells, though, I trap pollen and I put it in combs. I rub it into combs with my fingertips until a comb, one side of a comb is just packed full, solid, tight with pollen. And I use that as my pollen comb in my cell builder. So that pollen, that side with the pollen goes against the graft, but that's the only time I feed anything other than the spring. I introduced the new queens in 3-hole cages. Yeah, always. Well, yes, always. Requeening under a cage, because remember, they're not, you have to bring them into lay. But a new queen going in a nuke, pull the cork on the candy end, stick it down between the 2 frames of brood, and leave it for 10-12 days, and come back, remove the cage, make sure she's laying, and give them another story, another box. How do I saturate my mating yards? Well, I have about a number of apiaries surrounding my mating yards. My mating yards are about a half a mile apart, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 5 honey production apiaries surrounding the mating yard, so that's really the best I can do. I can't isolate. There's nowhere to isolate anymore unless I drive hours to the mountains. But I do offer queen bees, and if it's a newbie, I'll requeen their southern stock. If you want to buy nukes, please buy them from me. I'll give you a hell of a deal if you're within 3 miles of my mating yard. So I do the best I can. Well, yeah, the difference between working with brood factory nukes and say a brood factory standard 10 frame hives is first off is trying to get the bees to make maximize the number of frames of brood that they can produce for me, I find that they do better in the vertical configuration than in the horizontal because of heat transfer, because heat rises. And so they have an easier time warming the new combs that they need to lay in, or to relay the ones that are emerging. And so it just works a lot better. It's lighter. You know, I couldn't imagine doing this in standard 10 frame hives. You know, I can have in the space, in the footprint that a standard 10 frame Langstroth takes up, I can have 2 nucleus colonies in the same footprint with 2 queens laying at the same time, cranking out frames of brood. It's got to be better than 1 queen in a 10 frame footprint, don't you think? My winter losses in brood factories, pretty much my winter losses in brood factories and standard overwintered nucleus colonies is less than 10%. Yeah, I bank queens every winter. I bank queens. Right now I'm banking almost 500 queens, and every one of them is in a nucleus colony. I do not bank queens as such, but I hold them in nucleus colonies, and so they can start laying anytime they want. I overwinter my nucleus colonies that I make in June and July in 3 stories. So the first story is when I make them, move them to a yard, give them a queen. The second story comes about 12 days later, 10 days later. I check to see that the queen is laying. If she is laying, then I add another box, maybe with 1 comb against the divider and 3 foundations. As I go on further in the season, it'll be 2 foundations, and then it'll be 1 foundation, because they have a hard time at the end of the season drawing foundation. So now they're in two stories, and then sometime before the goldenrod float, say at the end of July, and they're really getting strong, and we got those hot, humid days, and they need more room, and I don't have any combs. I mean, I do have some combs, but what do I need to have? These things are getting so strong that they're going to swarm on the fall flow. And you know, I could fool around. I could pick combs out and put empties in and do all that kind of stuff. Instead, I take the top box off. I put a new super with 4 combs, and I put the top box back on. And what have I just done? I have just created the biggest possible empty space for her to lay in, right in the center of her cluster. And so forget it. That's the end of swarming for that year for those guys. Let's see, when they come through the winter, are they in the top box? Yes, of course. Usually we reverse them. We put the brood and everything down into the bottom box, and we move those empty combs up. We don't get to it every year, but I try to. I like to have the brood rearing cluster as low in the hive as I can get them, which is another reason we close that upper entrance, because bees like to put their brood, they like to have their brood near an entrance. And I don't want them high in the hive. I want them low in the hive. So yeah, we usually reverse. You're in 2 stories. So yeah, wow, you can't even look. Yeah, 3 stories, 4 combs on either side of the divider. So if there's 3 stories, that would be 12 combs, and that's pretty much standard for me now. The later made ones that are made in, say, later in July, they don't really build up as strong, and they don't need that box in the middle. So we winter them in 2s or 8 combs. Yeah, I mean, I guess you can use can we use nuke boxes and 10 frame boxes with a divider interchangeably? I guess so. You know, they're stackable. I like to have the bottom box be that divided 10 frame because it gives more stability. If you have just 4 or 5 frame nuke boxes stacked up high, boy, they're very tippy in the wind and in the frost heaves. We got frost heaving here, so you know it's yeah, that's what I'm going to say. Excellent job. More information for your beekeeper. So much to do, so little time. Oh boy, hey, listen, you know, you took those words out of my mouth. So much to do, so little time. Seriously, I'm coming near the end now, guys. Anyway. No, I don't really. You know, I mean, you can figure it out. The if a 10 frame lang is 16 1/4 wide, and you put the divider, you dado the divider into the front and back wall, and it goes right down to a cleat on the bottom board, and it's even with the top, so you know you can put a bag or inner covers on it, and so if the center of the divider, if the lang box is 16 1/4, the center of the divider should be at 8 1/8, correct? And so then the supers that go on top are 8 1/8, and they'll hold 4 combs. Now you may have some other kind of style of beehive, but that's how you would figure it. You know, you find the center point, you put the divider in there, and it's going to be half the width of that box. So you just make it fit to your box. Let's see. When I harvest brood, of course, I take the workers with them. I don't shake the bees off. No, I give them right to the cell builders. They go above a queen excluder. They don't fight. Bees don't fight as much as people think they fight. I don't know. They don't fight. I don't see any fighting. I unite bees together without paper sometimes, and I don't know. Randy, hey Randy, what sort of nukes do you mate your queens in? Well, you saw my 4 ways, which is a 10 frame lang that's divided in 4 inside interior, and each has its own entrance, and there's 4 little half combs. They're full depth, but they're only half length combs in each cavity. Each one has its own entrance, and you know, we make them up, and we give them the cells either that day or in the morning. And then 16 days later we catch the queens. And over the years I was not happy with the results, with the percent return for mated queens. You know, I'd like to get 80%. I'd like to get over 80%. If I could get over 80% every time I catch queens, I would be a happy camper, and I would dance. I would, you know, it doesn't happen, does it? And so we're trying
we average about 80%.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
But
and of course there's times we get a lot lower than that, and there's times we'll get 99%, but about 80% overall is what we count on.
And how many times do you get 65 and 70%?
Oh, frequent when it's rainy, frequently.
Absolutely. And so this happens, you know, and so what can we do to increase the percentage of return? And
move to Mexico.
We try landmarks. We try painting. We're going to put up some of those scary balloons that scare the birds away from the corn. We're going to even try that this year, but instead we made last spring, we made a bunch of 2-ways. And it's, you know, 2 2-ways can fit on top of 1 4-way, right? They're the 2-way box is 16 1/4 by 10 or something. And there's a follower board in the middle, and the bottom board has an entrance on each end. And so we made one whole group. A group is 128 nukes. That would either be 32 4-ways or 64 two-ways. So we made 64 two-ways. And Adam, one of my employees is an art major, and man, didn't he paint those up cool. And so anyway, we put those out in the field, and so we're okay. So out of 128, I hope to get 90. I keep 90 for what I need, and I sell 30. But sometimes I don't get 90. And now what do? Now I have to take it out of my stock to give to because I got orders. Okay. So first time we caught the two-ways, we got 105. Second time, 109. Third time, 105. And we go back to the four-ways, there we go, 75, and 85. Right back to the four-ways again, 109, and it's incredible. And then at the end of the season,